There are moments that break us, moments where the world we believed in reveals itself as something else entirely. This is the story of one of those moments. And more importantly, it's the story of what happened after. She walked into that courthouse wearing her best blazer, head held high, resume in hand, heart steady with the kind of hope that comes from years of work, years of sacrifice, years of believing that if you just do everything right, the system will see you. She didn't know that in less than 3 minutes, her body would be on that floor, her dignity stripped away in front of strangers, her voice silenced by the very system she had spent her entire life believing in. But what those court officers didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly understood in that moment, was that humiliation has a memory. And sometimes, justice doesn't come with an apology. Sometimes it comes with a gavel. This is the story of how a black woman was assaulted in a courthouse, and how years later she became the judge who would rewrite the very halls that tried to break her. This is Simone Carter's story. This is our Black Diary. Her name was Simone Carter. And if you had asked anyone in her neighborhood, the kind of neighborhood where corner stores knew your name and Sunday meant church bells and laughter spilling from screen doors, they would have told you the same thing. That girl's going somewhere. It was said with pride, with certainty, the way people speak about someone they've watched grow from a child into something more. Simone grew up in South Memphis, raised by a grandmother who wore her faith like armor and a mother who worked 2 shifts so her daughter wouldn't have to. There were nights when the power got shut off, and Simone would study by streetlight, her textbooks balanced on the windowsill where the orange glow from the street could reach the pages. While her classmates were at prom, she was at the public library, reading law books that were older than she was, their spines cracked and pages yellowed, but the words still sharp. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't dreaming of courtroom theatrics or her name in the papers. She was chasing something simpler and infinitely more difficult. Fairness, because Simone had seen it. She had watched the system chew people up who looked like her. She had seen public defenders who barely looked at their clients, who treated case files like assembly line work. She had watched judges who seemed to decide guilt before the gavel even dropped, their faces already arranged in judgment before a single word of testimony was heard. And somewhere in all of that witnessing, a thought took root in her young mind. If I can just get inside, maybe I can change it. So she fought. 4 years of undergrad while working night shifts at a grocery store. 3 years of law school with student loans that felt like shackles around her future. But she graduated. She passed the bar on her first try. And in 2015, at 29 years old, Simone Carter walked into the Davidson County Courthouse for her first day as a legal intern with the Public Defender's Office. She thought it was the beginning of her dream. She had no way of knowing it was the day her life would shatter. Because no one had told her that, to some people in that building, she wasn't a lawyer. She was just another black woman who didn't belong. It was a Wednesday morning, October 14th, 2015. Simone arrived early. She always did. Punctuality was something her grandmother had drilled into her, along with pressed clothes and direct eye contact. She wore a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and carried a leather portfolio her grandmother had bought her as a graduation gift. She looked like she belonged. But belonging, it turns out, isn't about what you wear. It's about who decides you're allowed to stay. She walked through the main entrance, past the metal detectors, past the security checkpoint. That's where she saw them. 3 court officers, all white, all middle-aged men in their 40s. The kind of men who wore their badges like permission slips, like proof of something they'd never had to earn. Their names were Officer Daniels, Officer Kowalski, and Officer Hayes. One of them, Daniels, looked at her. Not the way you look at a professional, not the way you look at a colleague, the way you look at something out of place, something that doesn't compute. "Excuse me," he called out. "Ma'am, stop right there." Simone turned, smiled professionally. "Good morning, officer. I'm here for—" "You need to go through the public entrance," he interrupted, his voice flat, matter of fact. She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry? Public entrance is around back. This is for court staff." Simone's smile didn't falter. "Not yet. I am court staff," she said, pulling out her intern ID. "I'm with the public defender's office." Officer Daniels didn't even look at the ID. He looked at her face, then her hair, then back at her face, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed belonged there. "That doesn't look real," he said. "Let that sit with you for a moment." She showed him official identification, government issued, with her photo, her name, her credentials, and he looked at her and decided it wasn't real. Not because there was anything wrong with the ID, but because there was something wrong in his mind with her holding it. "Sir, this is my official ID. I can call my supervisor if—" "Ma'am, I need you to step back." Now the other two officers were moving closer. Kowalski, Hayes. A triangle was forming around her, their bodies creating a barrier, a wall of authority that had nothing to do with actual threat and everything to do with perceived power. And that's when Simone felt it. That cold, ancient knowing that every black person in America carries in their bones, passed down through generations like a genetic warning system. Something was about to go very, very wrong. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said, her voice steady, calm, controlled. "I just need to get to my office." "You're trespassing," Daniels said, "and you're being non-compliant." Non-compliant. She was standing still. She was speaking calmly. She was holding her identification. But to them, her very presence was defiance. Her very existence in that space was an act of resistance that needed to be corrected. Officer Daniels reached for her arm. She pulled back, not aggressively, just instinct, the natural human response to being grabbed by a stranger. That's all it took. In 3 seconds, she was on the ground. Kowalski grabbed her left arm. Hayes grabbed her right. Daniels pressed his knee into her back, the full weight of his body driving her chest into the courthouse marble. Her cheek hit the cold floor. Her briefcase scattered, pens, legal pads, her grandmother's gift, all of it spreading across the polished stone like evidence of something broken. She couldn't breathe, not because of the weight pressing down on her spine, though that was real enough. She couldn't breathe because of the shame. Because there were 50 people in that lobby. Lawyers in expensive suits, clerks carrying case files, families waiting for hearings, their eyes wide with shock or carefully averted. And they all watched. They all just watched. "Stop resisting," Daniels yelled, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged space. But she wasn't resisting. She was just trying to breathe. Trying to understand how a law degree, a clean record, and a lifetime of believing in the system could end with her face pressed to the floor, handcuffed, humiliated, erased from her own story and rewritten as a threat that needed to be neutralized. They dragged her to a holding cell and kept her there for 4 hours. No phone call, no explanation, just silence and the smell of industrial cleaner and the sound of doors locking and unlocking somewhere down the hall. When her supervisor finally found her, finally tracked her down through a series of phone calls and increasingly frantic inquiries, the officers had their story ready. She refused to comply. We had to restrain her for safety. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Just a lie that would go into an official report, become part of a permanent record, a data point in a system that had already decided what she was before she ever walked through those doors. And when Simone finally walked out of that courthouse, hands still shaking, suit wrinkled, dignity in pieces, she made a decision, one that would take years to fulfill, but one that would change everything. If you're watching this story and you feel something rising in your chest, anger, recognition, grief, I want you to know that's exactly what Simone felt too. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, that they need to be heard, take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel. Because these stories don't make it into textbooks. They don't get carved into marble. But they're real, and they matter. Trauma isn't loud. Not always. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room, the thing no one talks about, but everyone carries. For weeks after that day, Simone couldn't enter a courthouse without her hands shaking. She would stand outside the doors, briefcase in hand, and her body would remember before her mind could catch up. The cold floor, the voices, the eyes of strangers who did nothing, who chose their comfort over her humanity. Her supervisor told her she could file a complaint. "It's your right," he said, his voice gentle, sympathetic, useless. But they both knew what that meant. Black woman versus 3 white officers. Who do you think they would believe? Who do you think the system was designed to protect? So Simone did something else. She kept going. Not because she wasn't hurt, she was devastated. Not because she wasn't angry, she was furious. But because she refused to let that moment define her. She refused to give them the satisfaction of watching her disappear. She worked longer hours than anyone else in the office. She took the harder cases, the ones other public defenders would quietly try to avoid, the clients with long rap sheets, the ones who didn't speak English well, the ones the system had already written off as guilty. She became known not for being loud or combative, but for being relentless, for showing up, for doing the work when everyone else had moved on. At night, she would sit in her grandmother's kitchen, the same kitchen where she used to study by candlelight when the power was out, and she would write. Not just case notes, though those filled pages and pages. She wrote reflections, personal observations that no one else would ever see. Today, I defended a man who reminded me of my uncle. The prosecution barely looked at him during cross-examination. I wonder if they even see us as human, or if we're just case numbers to process and forget. She didn't write for an audience. She wrote to remember, to hold on to the part of herself that still believed justice could be more than a word carved in stone that no one actually meant. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. Simone stopped asking to be let in. She stopped waiting for permission, for validation, for someone to tell her she belonged. She decided to build her own door. 5 years after that day on the courthouse floor, Simone Carter did something no one expected. She ran for judge. Campaigns are expensive. Campaigns are exhausting. And for a black woman with no political machine behind her, no wealthy donors writing checks, no establishment support, campaigns are almost impossible. The odds were stacked so high they seemed designed to be insurmountable. But Simone had something money couldn't buy. She had the people. The same people she had defended over those 5 years. The families who had sat in courtrooms and finally seen someone who looked like them, who spoke like them, who fought for them as if their lives mattered, because to her, they did. She knocked on doors until her knuckles were raw. She spoke at churches, community centers, barber shops. She didn't make grand promises about reforming the entire system overnight. She just told the truth. I know what it's like to be treated as less than human by the system, and I'm running so no one else has to feel that way in my courtroom. Her opponent was a 30-year veteran, white, well-funded, well-connected. The local newspaper endorsed him. The legal establishment backed him. Every traditional marker of legitimacy pointed in his direction. But the people, the ones who actually had to live with the consequences of judicial decisions, they endorsed her. On election night 2020, Simone sat in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by neighbors, friends, former clients who had become family. When the results came in, when the numbers finally appeared on the screen, she had won. By 11 points. Not a narrow victory, not a squeaker, a statement. Her grandmother held her face in both hands, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, and said, "Baby, you're not just a judge. You're an answer to every prayer your ancestors whispered in the dark." 3 months later, Simone Carter was sworn in as a circuit court judge. She wore the same navy blazer she had worn that day 5 years earlier, the one that still had a small tear on the sleeve from when they threw her to the ground. She had never had it repaired. She wore it as a reminder, not of the pain, but of the path, of how far she had traveled and at what cost. And on her second week on the bench, during a routine morning docket, she saw a familiar face walk into her courtroom, Officer Daniels. It wasn't a coincidence, not in the cosmic sense, though it certainly felt like one. Daniels was there for a hearing, a minor procedural matter involving courthouse security protocols. Routine. Boring. The kind of hearing that happens 100 times a week and no one remembers. Except this one would be different. When he walked in and saw her sitting behind the bench, elevated above him in black robes with the seal of the court behind her, he froze. You could see it, the exact moment recognition hit him. His face went pale. His confident stride faltered. The young woman he had thrown to the floor, the one he had called non-compliant, the one he had humiliated and erased, was now the judge. She was now the authority. She was now the one with the power to decide. Simone didn't react, not outwardly. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him. The way you look at someone when you've already won, when revenge is unnecessary because your very presence is the victory. The hearing proceeded exactly as it should have. Professional, by the book. Simone asked clear questions. She reviewed the documents carefully. She made her ruling based on facts and law, nothing more, nothing less. She didn't mention what had happened 5 years earlier. She didn't need to. Because here's what power actually looks like. It's not revenge. It's not humiliation. It's showing up. It's sitting in the seat they said you would never reach. It's looking someone in the eye who once treated you as invisible and reminding them, without a single word, that you are undeniable. After the hearing concluded, as Daniels turned to leave, as he reached for the courtroom door, Simone called out, "Officer Daniels." He stopped, turned slowly. She looked at him, not with anger, but with something deeper, something more powerful. Truth. "I want you to know something," she said, her voice measured, judicial, but unmistakably personal. "That day 5 years ago, when you put me on the ground in this building, I was terrified. Not of you, not of physical harm, but of what it meant. That even with a law degree, even with everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, I was still just a black woman who didn't belong." The courtroom was silent. The clerk had stopped typing. The bailiff stood perfectly still. "But I do belong," she continued. "Not because you let me, not because the system finally decided to make space for me, but because I never stopped believing I should be here." She paused, letting her words settle in the space between them. "I hope one day you understand that. Not for me. I don't need your understanding, but for the next person who walks through those doors, for the next young black woman who shows you her ID and you have to decide whether to see her credentials or just her skin." Officer Daniels didn't respond. He couldn't. What was there to say? He simply nodded once, barely perceptibly, and left. And Simone sat back down, picked up her gavel, and continued with her docket, because there were other cases to hear, other lives in the balance, other people waiting for justice. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his regret or his acknowledgement. She had something more powerful than both. She had her truth, and she had her seat. If this story has moved you, if you see yourself or someone you love in Simone's journey, leave a comment below. Share a name, tell a story, because these diaries aren't just mine to keep, they're ours to share. Here's what they don't tell you about resilience. It's not about being unbreakable. It's not about never feeling pain or doubt or fear. It's about breaking and still showing up the next day. It's about shattering into pieces and then slowly, carefully, deliberately putting yourself back together into something that resembles wholeness, even if the cracks still show. Simone Carter didn't become a judge to get revenge. She didn't do it to prove something to Officer Daniels or Officer Kowalski or Officer Hayes. She became a judge because somewhere along the way, between the courthouse floor and the campaign trail, between the tears and the triumph, she realized that her pain had a purpose, that her humiliation could be transformed into something that served others. Every case she hears now, she remembers. She remembers what it feels like to be unseen, to be doubted, to have your humanity questioned by people who don't even know your name. And because she remembers, she sees. She sees the young man in an orange jumpsuit who has been denied bail 3 times for a nonviolent offense. She sees the single mother facing eviction who can't afford a lawyer. She sees the undocumented worker too afraid to speak up, too afraid to ask for what the law says they deserve. And she makes sure they are heard. Not because she's soft, not because she doesn't believe in accountability, but because she understands that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about seeing people in their full humanity. That's the story. Not just of survival, though survival is real and necessary and hard. This is a story of transformation, of taking the very place that tried to erase you and rewriting its meaning. Of turning a courtroom from a site of trauma into a space of possibility. If you have ever been made to feel like you don't belong, if you have ever been pushed down, spoken over, dismissed, or treated as less than, remember this: your presence is not permission. It's power. You don't need anyone to let you in. You don't need validation from people who have already decided not to see you. Your existence, your persistence, your refusal to disappear, that is the revolution. And sometimes the greatest form of justice isn't dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to disappear. It's showing up day after day when everything in you wants to quit. It's putting on that torn blazer and walking back through those doors. It's believing in possibility even when the evidence suggests you shouldn't. This is Simone Carter's story, but in so many ways, it's ours too. These are the stories they don't teach in history books. They're not carved into marble or memorialized in monuments. These are the stories we carry in our chests, the ones we whisper to our children late at night when we want them to understand where they come from and what they're capable of. These are the stories that remind us we've always been here, we've always mattered, and we always will. This is our Black Diary. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, sit with it for a moment. Think about the Simones in your life. Think about the people who kept going when the world said stop, who kept believing when belief seemed foolish, who kept showing up when showing up seemed impossible. Leave a comment, share a name, tell a story, because these diaries, these testimonies, these truths, they're not just mine. They're not just Simone's. They're ours, and they deserve to be read. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Until next time.